Live, where we host a space every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, to talk about developments in the world of UBI and meet with the people who are making them happen. I'm Scott Santens. I've been researching, writing, and advocating for the concept of UBI for the last 10 years. For those new to the concept, UBI stands for Unconditional or Universal Basic Income. It's the idea that every individual in a society can and should be guaranteed a periodic cash payment without means test or work requirement in order to make their way in the world upon a firm foundation. I recently started the Income to Support All Foundation, or ITSA Foundation, which provides support to projects that aim to make UBI a reality through research, storytelling, and implementation. You can learn more at itsafoundation.org. I'm joined, as always, by my co-hosts, Conrad Shaw and later on Josh Worth, co-founders of Comingle. They're on here as the UBI guy and Comingler 1. Well, when Josh gets here, it'll be Comingler 1. Comingle is one of the first projects we're promoting at the ITSA Foundation. And Comingle, for those who don't know, it's a money-sharing app that's being developed that allows people to pool a percentage of their income into a community fund that gets divided up evenly and distributed as a weekly basic income. The result is that members give money when they have it and get money when they need it, so that no member ever goes a week without any income. You can learn all about it at comingle.us. Conrad, do you want to add anything at all before we head on to the news and our guest, Karl Widerquist?
I don't have a lot. The crowdfund we did at the end of last year is still open, and we're trying to get as many backers on the list as we can, so we can demonstrate this some popular demand for it. I put a link in the comments of some ways to get involved, which includes that and includes our newsletters. We have a Comingle YouTube channel that has a lot of fun videos, as well as the playbacks of the old spaces we've had. Yeah, so those are all the ways to get involved. For the new few people who dropped in, encourage you to retweet this so we can build up the room a little bit more. And let's get started.
Oh, okay. So we have a guest this week, and it's Karl Widerquist, who is been a long time advocate of basic income, and he is. I mean, if you've done any reading into basic income, you've read some of his stuff. Even when I got into this 10 years ago, he'd already been at this for I think since the 80s or something, right, Karl, or even earlier than that. Anyways, he's been around for a while. He knows quite a lot, and it's great to have him here today. And before we get to Karl, though, we'd like to just talk a little bit of basic income in the news first, to kind of help also set the discussion and to make sure everyone's informed about what's been going on. And for this week, what really is on my radar, and it's actually something I'll write about as my next article, is the new bills that are being pushed in state after state in the country that are looking to ban basic income pilots and experiments and stuff using the public money. And this is, of course, in response to the going on almost 200 various pilots and programs that are at the local level around the country. And so there are these bills, and they're all very similar, and so that really caught my eye. And looking to all do the same thing with the same language. And this is actually already in 7 states now. This is the states with anti-UBI bills are Iowa, West Virginia, Texas, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Arkansas. And I wasn't sure who was behind it until actually just recently. I thought at first that maybe Alec was behind it, but it's actually, as far as I can tell, it appears to be the Foundation for Government Accountability, the FGA. And they're clearly behind this because you can go to their website and you can see they've been publishing stuff, and also you can go to their Twitter account and see the anti-UBI stuff they've been going after. They've seeded op-eds in various um, news outlets around the country in these states that they're focused on. So I've been reading these various op-eds, and if you pay attention, you'll find that the authors are from the FGA. And
What does that stand for again?
the Foundation for Government Accountability. So this is an organization that is they're part of the State Policy Network, and they they look to lobby the state governments and to do stuff at the state level. Their logic is what happens at the state level can then eventually be federal, and that goes for prevention and stuff too. They're very anti-welfare. One of the I believe their slogans or something is that they want to return America to a country where entrepreneurship thrives, personal responsibility is rewarded, and paychecks replace welfare checks. And so their argument is that this is basic income is very anti-entrepreneur. Of course, we know that's wrong. We know that from the pilots, entrepreneurship actually skyrockets quite often in pilots. But they have this, they're operating on the common belief that welfare is bad for you, and thus, anything that appears to be some kind of federal assistance of some kind is bad for you, which goes beyond basic income to also Medicaid, food stamps, and you can see the other things they've been up to get an idea.
It sort of it makes me wonder, because this is the first time hearing about it, about them. Are these bills, is the wording in it guaranteed income or universal basic income? Like which, because a lot of the stuff I feel
We've
like they're
we've talked
responding
about
to
this.
probably are guaranteed income.
We've talked about this before, and the language is universal. They'll refer to it as universal basic income, but they're explicitly about the lack of work requirement. So anything that doesn't have a work requirement is bad, which is also why they've been lobbying for Medicaid to have work requirements and for food stamps to have work requirements, because that's their big issue, is the lack of work requirements.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so there's multiple articles. I'll have to share these. I'll share these in the comments and then put it in the space here. But it's very interesting to see what else they've been up to, because I think that's part of the story here too. So here's an article from The Guardian that was published about 7 months ago, titled "Billionaire-Funded Group Driving Effort to Erode Democracy in Key U.S. States." The Foundation for Government Accountability, backed by Richard Uihlein, I think is how it's pronounced, exerting influence in Ohio, Missouri, South Dakota, and Arkansas. And so just to read a little bit of this, I feel like I just want to read everything, but I'm just gonna try to just read some snippets. A Florida group primarily funded by an Illinois billionaire is driving the recent tax on direct democracy in states such as Ohio, Missouri, South Dakota, and Arkansas. The Foundation for Government Accountability, a Florida-based group affiliated with the alliance of conservative think tanks called the State Policy Network, has played a key role in recent efforts to raise the threshold for passing citizen ballot initiatives from a simple majority to a supermajority, and to make it harder to place measures on the ballot in the first place. These efforts are designed to derail citizen-led ballot initiatives to protect abortion rights, raise the minimum wage, or expand Medicaid. In effect, FGA and its allies seek to give 41% of the voting population an effective veto over the wishes of the other 59%. In at least 4 states, FGA and its lobbying arm, the Opportunity Solutions Project, that's their C4, have lobbied or testified in favor of changing ballot initiative rules to enshrine minority rule, and in some cases have financed ballot committees advocating for these changes. FGA has also issued reports, legal memos, op-eds, and polling that advocate for gutting direct democracy. I mean, I highly recommend reading all of these, but I also
something on their website that says stop ranked choice voting.
oh yeah, I haven't seen the ranked choice voting one,
Yeah.
but that makes perfect sense that they're also anti-ranked choice voting. Uh, let's see. So I'll just just kind of skim each of these three articles I think are important for everyone to read to get an idea of what the FGA is about. So here's another one. This is from the Washington Post um, from May 2023, or updated May 2023. Um, and this is titled The Conservative Campaign to Rewrite Child Labor Laws. The Foundation for Government Accountability, a Florida-based think tank and lobbying group, drafted state legislation to strip child workplace protections, emails show. When Iowa lawmakers voted in mid-April to roll back certain child labor protections, they blended into a growing movement driven largely by a conservative advocacy group. At 4:52 a.m. on April 18th, the state's Senate approved a bill to allow children as young as 14 to work night shifts and 15-year-olds on assembly lines. The measure, which still must pass the Iowa House, is among several the Foundation for Government Accountability is maneuvering through state legislatures. The Florida-based think tank and its lobbying arm, the Opportunity Solutions Projects, have found remarkable success among Republicans to relax regulations that prevent children from working long hours in dangerous conditions, and they are gaining traction at a time the Biden administration is scrambling to enforce existing labor protections for children. The FGA achieved its biggest victory in March, playing a central role in designing a new Arkansas law to eliminate work permits and age verification for workers younger than 16. Its sponsor, State Rep. Rebecca Burke, said in a hearing that the legislation came to me from the Foundation for Government Accountability. So again, this is what they operate like ALEC in that just they basically make it as easy as possible for state legislators to pass these bills by writing them for them. And they just, hand them a bill and say, hey, could you pass this, please? That'd be great. Thanks.
Did you say what
And
ALEC is? What's ALEC?
uh, ALEC, I have to look that up. What it actually stands for.
We're not talking about Baldwin or something.
We are not talking about Baldwin. Okay, it's the American Legislative Exchange Council. So again, it's another state-focused like lobbying group. So that's why I thought it may have been ALEC at first, because it just smells a lot like it. But it's a newer organization. It's basically founded. It's along with very similar lines about getting this stuff passed in states. So yeah, so the original one I was talking about with or what was I talking about first? It was the Guardian article, right? So the Guardian article, that was about how they're looking at removing the ability for voters to pass signature initiatives with 50% plus one of the vote. Instead, they would require supermajority of 60%. And they're doing this because they want to hurt the democratic ability to protect things like abortion and expansion of Medicaid in these states. They are really upset that voters are actually putting up these signature initiatives and actually voting to expand Medicaid and protect abortion. So they want to stop that. And then this Washington Post article is about how they've been working on making sure that basically 14 and 15-year-olds can work. What they're doing is before in these states, let's say you would have to get like parental permission and these like the state would know where 14 and 15-year-olds like are working. They're tracked. They know that they're working and they know what they're doing, and they can even stop in and make sure that they're abiding by the rules for child labor. And this is looking to get rid of those, which of course makes it very difficult to make sure that kids, aren't doing these things that they aren't supposed to be doing, supposed to be allowed to be doing, and that they're not being, taken advantage of and put in harm's way, and everything else. So it's just interesting that they're also for child labor.
This is all hilarious, actually. Like they call themselves something for government accountability, and they define accountability as people don't get to actually vote. The government doesn't support people or protect children. The minority should be able to control what happens. That's a funny way to describe a government's accountability.
Yeah, it really is like in line with the just that, like the trope of like how bills are named the opposite of like what they're actually doing. And I also think it's funny that even has foundation, in its name, just because, Income to Support All Foundation, and it's like, oh, they're the foundation for government accountability. Like, yeah, sure you are.
We should start one that's called the freedom to work until you die.
Right. Have a universal basic income bill called the freedom to like be a wage slave or something, like the exact opposite of what it is. So then this third one that I wanted to mention is from Vox, and this is from 2019. And the headline is "Inside the Shadowy Think Tank Pushing to Kick 3.1 Million People Off Food Stamps." The increasingly influential Foundation for Government Accountability is mixing sketchy research with legislative leverage, and it's working. This is beginning of this is in December. The Foundation for Government Accountability hosted public officials from across the country in Orlando, Florida. The scene: Walt Disney World's Swan and Dolphin Resort, an ocean-themed oasis with palatial fountains next to a lake lined with palm trees. The FGA, a right-leaning think tank based in Naples, Florida, paid travel and lodging expenses for many of the conservative leaders in attendance, including Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin and 3 White House aides. Guests heard presentations such as Stop the Scam, the reality of food stamp fraud. Between sessions, the foundation treated attendees to catered desserts and a fireworks display from a terrace featuring a Eiffel Tower overlooking the Epcot World Showcase Lagoon, according to invitations obtained by the Center for Public Integrity through open records requests. The FGA aimed to send decision makers back to their respective states or the nation's capital with fresh zeal to restrict access to public assistance programs designed for low-income people, including Medicaid and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, formerly known as the Food Stamp Program. The association even provided roadmaps for achieving this goal in the form of model legislation, suggesting wording for laws and regulations that could serve as a template for like-minded policymakers. Just want to find like some more key quotes of this. I should have kind of highlighted some of these, but I'll go ahead and post these 3 links now.
Well, while you're posting, I'm curious to see if Karl has anything to say about
I really want Karl to chime in too. Karl, you want to chime in on these anti-UBI bills, and also let's just start with that. But I'm also curious to see, just with your long history of just basic income in general, like what you know of any like kind of organized response at all in the past, and if this is like a much newer thing, and what that portends.
This is, as far as I know, a new thing. This is the first I've heard of these anti-UBI bills, and you don't pass a law against something that you don't think is going to happen anyway. And it doesn't seem on. So this is a sign of the of the movement's success. We're having, did you say when I saw you the other day, Scott, that there's actually 200 experiments in UBI going around the U.S. right now?
Not 200 yet, approaching 200. I think right now it's
Okay.
around 150, and that's including both like the newer generation stuff, previous stuff,
So,
stuff that's finished, stuff that's being planned. But
so
yeah, it's around 150.
So what this means is that these experiments have gotten on somebody's radar, and they've recognized this as a significant enough threat that they're going to use their clout, which they could be using to say, government, buy this stuff that I'm selling, which is what, most of the money that's going around the federal and capital and the state capitals. That's what it's going around asking for. They've got something that they could think of an excuse for the government to buy, and they'll pay representatives to vote to buy that stuff. That's why we get stuff in the Defense Department that even the generals don't want. But they got money they could be using for that, and they're using it to ban basic income experiments. So it shows that they're beginning to view these experiments as a threat to us. I'm sure it's still a very minor threat, but at least we're on their radar. And this has a history of this kind of legislation. Has a history of backfiring. I was so depressed in the 90s and the 2000s with all these states voting to amend their state constitutions to ban same-sex marriage, when same-sex marriage at the time was a fringe proposal. But it turned out, little did I know at the time, that this was actually going to be an important step towards the national legalization of same-sex marriage, because they looked like such bigots. They really exposed themselves to the bigots that they were. And it really, I think those same-sex marriage bans hastened the legalization of same-sex marriage by, I don't know how long, perhaps decades, but they were definitely ended up working in our favor, as depressing as it was when it was happening, working in our favor in the sense of the favor of people who like freedom. So I don't know if this will be big enough to backfire on them the way the same-sex marriage bans did. Well, but it is in some way a positive development.
I mean, yeah. What about the brilliant scheme by UBI advocates? To just throw the absurd out there, and like we should have been doing this all along.
Yeah. So, by the way, I am going to experiment with my input volume. I think I might have it up too high. Now I've turned it down fairly low. So is it too low, or is it not low enough?
You're coming in quite loud.
Your volume sounds good to me. Yeah, Carl. Volume is never an issue with you, Carl.
Yeah, but is it too low now? Or is this
no.
high? Because I can turn it down more.
No, it's good.
Okay, good. Now, there's other stuff y'all brought up in there that I'd like to talk about. You talked about UBI and entrepreneurship and these super majority rules designed to protect the minority. I was like,
yeah,
talk about that stuff.
Yeah, no, let's get into this. But before we do more of that, I just want to read a little bit more from this. Just found another segment, because this gets into the people who are like paying for this. So again, like one of the billionaires based out of Ohio is Dick Uihlein. It's Uihlein. Not sure if that's pronounced correctly, but let's just call him Dick. As the measure moved through Ohio's Republican-controlled legislature, Dick Uihlein gave the newly created Save Our Constitution PAC, which ran ads pressuring state lawmakers to support the measure. The foundation controlled by Uihlein is also the largest known source of FGA's funding, giving $17.6 million since 2014. He's also been one of the key funders of election denial Among other things, he's poured tens of millions into his, quote, Restoration of America network that promotes ludicrous election conspiracy theories and which create a controversial debate database that publishes voters' personal information online in the name of uncovering election fraud. In the 2022 cycle, they were also top donors to election-denying candidates like the Pennsylvania gubernatorial hopeful Doug Mastriano and Nevada Secretary of State candidate Jim Marchand. And let's see, I think there's another name in here, but yeah, so one of these people, Dick Uihlein, billionaire from Chicago, he's one of the big donors to FGA. And yeah, so let's get into just the impact of 60% voting requirements. You know what that really means. This is really also a discussion about the ability in the Senate to stop any legislation from happening. Thanks to effectively a veto of the 40%. You want to do anything, Carl?
Oh, sure. So these supermajority rules go back to have the problem that they're supposed to solve is one of the oldest phony problems in political philosophy. This goes back to why Plato was against democracy and why Aristotle was skeptical about democracy. This idea that the minority would be subject to plunder by the majority. Yeah. In a democracy. When they were talking about this, and for at least 2,000 years afterward, the minority was a specific group. And the minority was rich people. That they knew, well, rich people have always run things, and there are clearly a lot less rich people than there are middle and low income people. If we have a democracy, the middle and low income people have would plunder the rich and destroy the system. And this in recorded history with thousands of years in experimenting with democratic rule, this has never happened. There's never been, there's been redistributive taxation, but plundering the system in a way that effectively destroys it has not been done by a democracy. Maybe it's done in the French Revolution, Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, but none of those were democracies. Those are horrible tyrannies. So it's an unfounded fear, and this fear, when the framers of the U.S. Constitution were putting these supermajoritarian rules in place, the minority that they were thinking of was not black people, it was not Native Americans, it was not lower class women, it was not Spanish-speaking people, it was not any of the people we think of as oppressed minorities. It was rich people. The Constitution was being written by rich people, and they were not establishing full democracy. We didn't get, even among white men, we did not, no, people talk about when we got black suffrage and female suffrage. Nobody talks about when we got universal white male suffrage, which wasn't until the 1830s. So they weren't even there. So they weren't even experimenting with giving all white men the vote because, well, a lot of those men are poor. And so the minority they were talking about when they entrenched that stuff into the Constitution was rich people. And then what they did is they wrote a Constitution that was really favorable to rich people. And then they make it hard to change the Constitution with these supermajority rules. supermajority rules do not protect minorities in general, ever. They protect any minority that benefits from the status quo. Well, if the status quo is stacked against your minority, which is basically what it means to be oppressed, then a supermajority rule actually makes it harder to end oppression against your minority, and that is what has happened with the U.S. Constitution for all these years. That the many things, not just supermajority rules, but things like the filibuster, the Supreme Court, have blocked legislation that would have reduced oppression against women, Black people, Native Americans, gay people, and so on. Jeremy Waldron really influences this book. His book, Law and Disagreement, is a fantastic book about these things that are supposed to protect the minority, and they protect the one minority that they cared about, which is the rich people.
So just trying to play a devil's advocate role, if the effect of things like filibusters and supermajority rules is effectively to prevent change to the status quo, what if someone, arguing for them said things could be worse for the oppressed minorities and it's protecting them from further oppression?
Yeah, you could imagine that happening. You certainly could imagine that happening. And there's been some rare rare cases where the Supreme Court has stepped in to desegregate schools, and the Supreme Court told. I'm thinking about when I think for examples that come to the Supreme Court, not supermajority rules. When the Supreme Court attempted to block President Jackson from walking a bunch of Native Americans to their deaths, he went ahead and did it anyway, and the supermajority rule that protected him from impeachment for that offense. That supermajority rule helped him do that, despite the Supreme Court being against him. Yeah, I can imagine some case where somebody wants to make legislation that's really bad for some oppressed group, and it fails due to the supermajority rule. But I can't think of any examples. But I can think of lots of examples where people wanted to end oppression, and we used the supermajority rule to keep them from ending that oppression.
What about with abortion? Could it be speculated that, all the losses in the abortion rights space of late could have happened much sooner, or
if abortion was entrenched in the Constitution and protected by the Supreme Court, then you could imagine it be more difficult for state legislatures to get rid of it, and that did happen for a while. However, if we'd have simply had a majority vote of the full population of the country without all these biases we have to privileged groups, abortion would have been nationally legal decades ago. It might not ever have been made illegal, which was made illegal due to lobbying by doctors who were more protecting their salaries. It wasn't even a big issue among religious people when it was made illegal originally. So, these are things could happen. But if you look at what really does happen with these rules, it is most often protecting the most privileged people who also, part of the problem is just our democracy is so corrupt by the legalized corruption that we call campaign contributions and dark money, right, that things just simply favor entrenched interests. And if you want, there was a time I remember when they got same-sex marriage in New York State because a billionaire stepped in. Well, a billionaire stepped in and came on the side of gay marriage. Well, good for this one billionaire, but that's a problem in the system where, well, if you want a good thing to happen, you gotta get the donor class convinced of it, and then to put them to be convinced of enough to put their money where their mouth is.
It's sort of the story of everything. But I'm sort of pushing on this because one of the things I've always imagined is like sort of a North Star federal policy for basic income includes things like it's tied to it's like the level would be tied to a percentage of GDP or mean per capita income or something that is a moving target. And one of the other things I always imagine is it should be enshrined in the Bill of Rights as something that so that it takes some sort of a supermajority to get rid of it, thereby not protecting minorities, but actually protecting majorities from powerful minorities. So I have always thought of it in terms of, the way to really establish it. So it's a lot harder to mess around with is with some sort of a supermajority protection as well.
Well, that's the way I thought until I read Jeremy Waldron's book, and it's his theory. I've not written on democratic theory. Well, not these kinds of issues. So you're getting this argument kind of secondhand. But he argues that enshrining things in the Constitution generally doesn't work, and is generally it doesn't work as effectively as if you have the UK system where technically the House of Commons could do just about anything. They'd get some little bit of delay from the House of Lords, but that's about it. They can do anything. So they could ban Methodists tomorrow and have the Methodists torture them until they become Episcopalians or something. They could do that tomorrow, but they don't. And what Waldron says is that even John Stuart Mill, when he was talking about that we should have an absolute right of free speech, John Stuart Mill was not talking about putting that in the Constitution. He was saying we, the majority, should recognize that this is a right and we will make no legislation against it. He wasn't talking about, because the tactic of enshrining it in the Constitution, Waldron has loads of arguments about why that tactic, although it can do some good, usually does more harm than good, because the things you entrench, it's only as good as what you entrench. And we tend to entrench things that's good for the wealthy.
It seems kind of like a stopgap acknowledgement for, where we, and to the degree to which we don't actually have a functioning democracy. So it's sort of an authoritarian hold against like the powers of the entrenched minorities. And
I would also, I just want to add too, because I have strong feelings with the Senate filibuster and how it needs to be just gotten rid of, and we should just be able to pass laws with simple majority votes in Congress, and that there's so many bills that would have been good that we didn't pass, and sure, there's also bills that would have been bad that we didn't pass. But I think that's part of the problem, is that these politicians can run on like really unpopular stuff, or stuff that would be really unpopular if it actually happened, and there's not like any teeth to this. And I would prefer that it's if some bad stuff passed because of some majorities and it was clear who was responsible for it, then they would pay politically for that, instead of being able to basically say, oh well, we supported this and didn't actually pass it. And kind of like the situation with abortion, even, where it's like the dog catching the car kind of situation, where thanks to actually finally getting what they wanted, then they're actually really paying political consequences because what they did was extremely unpopular. So like not only is it kind of theoretical argument as far as is it should 40% of the Senate be able to stop anything from happening, even though it's something is really popular. But also, like, there is something to be said for the ability to pass unpopular stuff, so that people can actually say, "Oh, that was their fault. I dislike that. I'm not going to vote for them. I'm going to vote against that." And there needs to be some consequences, some bite, so that everything can work better.
It's interesting too. This is making me. It feels like a macrocosm of one of the key sort of philosophical elements of UBI to me, where UBI is all based in trust. It's based in trusting people, and the human instinct to kind of try to lock things down and control it by having work requirements and means testing conditions and all these things to make sure the money isn't getting wasted is actually ending up being the big waste of the money and causing the big waste of the money. And this idea, and I it's interesting that I never thought of it this way before. Like, I had the same urge to lock it down. Like, if we get something good in place, don't let anyone fuck it up, But if what you're saying is implying to me, Carl, is that that's a similar sort of negative instinct that I have to not trust, future generations, future legislations, the system itself, and the people ongoing to make the right decision in the future. And maybe that's something I need to look at.
Well, yeah, because what I do is I don't trust the current generation. So let's say we'd have gotten to a perfect democracy in 1950, and so they said, okay, we're going to get rid of all the stuff that favors rich people. We're just going to, but we're going to have a new constitution that's going to entrench the values that we have right now. And then we're going to enshrine those in the Constitution. So really, whenever we use these supermajority rules or bills of rights and stuff, we're really going to have to. It's really going to be for the benefit of any minority. Any minority will be able to use this. But then, what would the electorate of 50? What kind of rights would they have enshrined? They certainly wouldn't have enshrined rights for LGBTQ people. They would have probably enshrined like really homophobic rules into it. Native Americans are 3% of the population. They wouldn't have had much influence on what was happening. They might have enshrined that you have to have a supermajority if you want to give land back to the Indians. So they can, if anything that you might enshrine, you can do it in a way that sounds good, but then ends up giving them power to entrenched interests. And that's why I found Waldron's law legislation and liberty so convincing.
But surely, Carl, my worldview has achieved true full enlightenment at this point. They could allow me to dictate the rest of the future. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, that's what Mao said. And looked how that worked out. Yeah, he only had he had almost 5-6 years that didn't have famine while he was dictator. So yeah, it worked out pretty well. But I say, but Jeremy Waldron, moving on from his stuff about democratic theory, he has the best article about basic income that never mentions basic income. It isn't about basic income. Jeremy Waldron.
I always appreciate those.
Homelessness and the issue of freedom. If you haven't read that, it's like a must read. If you're already inclined to basic income, when you read the problems he discusses there, you're like, well, the solution is basic income. Clearly, the solution is basic income. Homelessness and the Issue of Freedom by Jeremy Waldron. Recommend it to anybody. He's a law theorist, but it's something that anybody can understand. It's not technical, and you don't need to be a law theorist to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of this, so every time we talk, Carl, you make me think of things in a different way. You have like a way of breaking stuff down that kind of breaks preconceived notions. And it kind of begs the question, who the hell's Karl? And I think a lot of people don't know that yet. We didn't properly introduce you. So let's talk about like what brought you to UBI and why we should all listen to you.
But before we do that, just a quick reminder to everybody to retweet the space and encourage other people to join in and listen. Karl, take it
Okay,
away.
Who are
sure.
you?
So I was born in Chicago, but raised in the little town of Cassopolis, Michigan. At the time, and it was the largest outdoor hog producing county in the United States back then. It's not anymore. And I was born in 1965. I learned about basic income when I was in my first year of high school in 1980. And I was convinced because I was brought up by parents who were very much interested in making the world a better place, and that to be a good person, you've really got to be on the side of the very least advantaged. And when I heard about basic income or things like it, like the negative income tax, the guaranteed income, when I first heard about this kind of stuff, I said, this is when you're really on their side, on the side of the least advantaged. You're not saying, oh, we're going to offer you a job. It's going to be a great job. You're going to love this job. But if you don't take it and you can't prove you're unable to take it, then we're going to let you go ahead and be homeless. That kind of stuff, that's not really pro-worker. That's not pro-oppressed person. I don't trust anybody that says, oh, we're giving you what you want, a great job, but you have to take it. But if you really want to help the least advantaged, then stop forcing them to do stuff. Stop saying they got to prove this, that, and the other thing. Be on their side unconditionally. So really that's really, oddly enough, that's not how it was presented to me. It was presented to me by Milton Friedman about how to simplify the welfare system, and very little about getting bureaucrats off the back of low-income people. But to me, I very quickly went to that, and that really became the basis of my support for basic income. Of course, I was a freshman in high school. I had to get through high school, college, worked for a while, decided to go get a PhD in economics, and only when I finished that in 1996 did I start writing about basic income, and didn't really get published on it till 1999. So I've been at it now for 25 years, and I've written, and in those 25 years, I got a second PhD in normative political theory because I realized I was more interested into the ethics of policy than I was into the economics of policy. So I've been writing not only about basic income, but about ethical theory of how government and society should work.
I just want to add, Karl, that I think it's funny that in order to be an ethical economist, it actually requires 2 PhDs.
Well, okay, there's one or two guys I know of who are so smart they could do it. They could do it with just a 1 PhD. These are Amartya Sen and what's his name? Romer. What's Romer's first name? Anyway, those two are economists who write political philosophy, who are as respected among political philosophers as anybody with a PhD in it. Then you have other people, economists, who write political philosophy that political philosophers actually kind of snicker at. People like Milton Friedman and F.A. Hayek. Oh, you read a book, huh? You read
I always like to
philosophy, huh? Yeah, you might want to read another one.
Our economics education is so limited. I have felt for a long time that in order to really be a good economist, at least if you're talking about public policy, you need human behavioral psychology education. You need to be forced to spend a couple of years, as a social worker. Like, I feel like you need to know what the hell you're talking about if you're going to present policy. And a lot of our economics only education people that end up making policy, use these same absurd preconceived notions and assumptions that, like, every single person is a utility maximizer, and people are on this earth to collect stuff and do as little as possible. It's like it bears very little relevance to how human beings actually behave, how systems actually behave, and bureaucracies. It's just like on paper some sort of idea, not based in any sort of actual understanding of people.
Well, certainly the psychology of economics needs to be improved, and also the way economics judges benefit, which is completely in utilitarian terms, which has been utilitarianism has basically been thrown out by the vast majority of political philosophers a half century ago, but economists are still unquestioningly using it. So it certainly needs some improvement, but also there are things that economists economists understand that a lot of people, when they're thinking about policy, don't, and they could benefit from understanding. People would benefit from a good critical understanding of economics. In uncritical, no knowledge of economics of mainstream economics is dangerous, but an uncritical knowledge of mainstream economics is equally dangerous.
Yeah, I spent some time as a day trader when I was.
Oh,
first
wow!
New York.
I spent some time as a runner, so I would have been the guy giving you messages, like the lowest level guy in the room when you were doing your day.
I wasn't that kind of day trader. I was just on looking at a computer screen all day. But
I give it 2 Tuesdays for Wednesday, that kind of thing.
Say it again.
2 Tuesdays for Wednesday.
I don't know what that means.
A day trader. I'll give you February 14th for March 6th. You know?
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
No,
that's not funny, but technically that's a joke. I mean, technically, you can see how that qualifies as a joke, even though I'm sure nobody listening laughed or would conceivably laugh.
I didn't get that at first either, but I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I do appreciate the explanation. No, but what I wanted to say was that what I took away from that is that, you're sitting in that office with a bunch of, frat boys who have like a CNBC in the background all day long or whatever, some sort of financial news. And you very quickly learn the pattern that no one actually knows what they're talking about. Like there's moments where people can feel like it's predictable, but it like you're basically just taking guesses and trying to, strategize and time it right so that you mitigate your losses when you're inevitably wrong a lot of the time. And what it really is it's trying to predict not some sort of scientific mathematical reality. It's predicting human emotion in aggregate across, millions of people, and it's unpredictable. And so what you see is the news stories are always like just a format, a template. Like here's what's happening in the news, therefore this is what happened in the market. And the market could be up or down, and they would just say this item frightens investors, or this item, or they would just take A and B and smash them into a sentence and say, see, this is obviously why it happened, but only after it happened. No, and sort of predicting human behavior in aggregate in general is a fool's errand, I think.
Oh, yeah. Have you ever read The Black Swan?
No, but I saw the Natalie Portman film.
Oh, no. Not that Black Swan. The book, let's see, The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who was a kid in Lebanon when the Civil War broke out in, what was that, 1976? And how everybody said they knew it was, there's not going to be a Civil War. Oh, there's not going to be a Civil War. It's going to be really short. Oh, it's going to work out like this. Nobody knew what they were talking about. And the guy now works in the financial industry in the USA, and he's like, it is the same thing. Nobody knows what they're talking about. The predictions of the future is inherently unpredictable because of these things that he called black swans, unpredictable things that come up that nobody can see coming. And these things exist. These things keep happening, and nobody anticipates them. Sorry about that. So the So we were basing things on our predictions. And this is what I find out when I look at what people are doing in the financial industry, especially the prognosticators, which were always there. And there's always somebody who's like the new guru. This guy's got to figure out. And basically it's just somebody who's on a winning streak.
Yeah, they guessed it right on the last one.
If we guess coin flips, there's always going to be somebody who's been right for the last 20 times in a row. And we think, wow, is this guy psychic? Well, then he's wrong. Then he's wrong like 10 out of the next 20 times. But then there's always somebody else who's been right 20 times in a row. And this is our latest guru is just somebody who's on a winning streak, and they all always get discredited. And these supposedly really smart guys who make up the financial industry never get to this point where they say, oh, none of these guys know what they're talking about. The way Nassim Nicholas Taleb did. He figured that out. And he applies it not just to finance, but to politics and all sorts of things. Great book. Recommended.
Wasn't there a really smart cat that was also especially good at trading, and that had like a really good record? Again, showing like how ridiculous this is and how much luck is involved. A cat. Yeah.
Isn't there a website like Spurious Correlation that will give you those things? There was this a big thing when I was doing finance in the late 1980s, or the lowest level. I took a class, and they talked about at that time for a long time. There had been this spurious correlation between gold and pork bellies. Pork bellies aren't even traded anymore, but pork bellies were a big deal back in from like the 40s through the 80s or 90s. I don't know why, but the guy was like, I know this is a spurious correlation, but I don't like to be long on gold when pork bellies are down. It's just
yeah.
It's kind of like pro football player who always wears the same socks no matter what in every game. I remember. I was. I went to the University of Michigan. So during the playoffs, I'm wearing my Michigan sweatshirt, and Michigan won the. For those of you who don't follow the college football, Michigan won the college football championship this year. And I was wearing the shirt, and somebody came up to me, and was mentioning her husband, who's a doctor, was a Michigan grad. Oh, and he always wears this certain shirt while Michigan is playing. And I'm like, wow, you're not really selling me on his doctor services. And she's like, what? Why? Well, because he's superstitious. He just, that doesn't really mean he's, you want him to do science, And she says, oh, lots of doctors are superstitious like that. They want to wear their lucky socks when they go into surgery. Okay, a little scary to me, but there you go. Sports fans especially need to know nothing you do in front of the TV affects the play of the game in any way, unless you're a coach and you're on the phone with the coaches on the field.
Well, I've always felt that there's definitely a way to influence the outcome of a sports game, and it's that there needs to be enough people on the field praying together, and if they pray enough and more than the other team, then that team will win based on just prayer strength.
Well, yeah, if there is a God, and you're praying to the right one, but the evidence of that is not real good. That's why most people take God on faith rather than on evidence, because they're like, faith is just a way of saying, well, I actually don't have any evidence to support this, but I'm going to believe it anyway.
Well, I've been thinking about this sort of thing an awful lot, especially in the last few days. We just lost my father-in-law, and it's kind of tying into my larger philosophy about UBI that I've sort of come to over the years, which is that, in trying to break down human beings, human nature, instead of there's the makers and the takers or whatever, what is the thing that connects us all? and I've sort of come to that we all want to matter, we all want to have control over our environment, that sort of thing. And it was really interesting. I might crack up a little during this, but yesterday I wanted my mother-in-law to have her room back, and there were some marks on the wall from the hospital bed, and I wanted to paint over it. Um, and I was sitting there, and they had put up a bird feeder on the window, and they hadn't seen, in the last few days of his life, so that because that's where he could see, and they wanted him to see a bird, and we hadn't seen a bird the whole time. And I was sitting there painting on the yellow over the markings, and a cardinal flies up to the bird feeder and it's just sitting there. And I thought, oh wow, that feels meaningful. If that was if I was a religious person, I might have a meaning for that or whatever. And I didn't actually know. I learned later that people say a cardinal that's what it's supposed to be, is like a visit from a loved one who's passed on or whatever. And also, it turns out the school mascot where he taught and my wife went is the cardinal. It was just all these things, but it made me think about this human need to find meaning in things. This idea that intellectually deep down we kind of understand there's no inherent meaning in anything, or at least I think a lot of us feel that. But we have this strong urge to find meaning in things. And it made me think that the meaning in life is not to or is to generate meaning or to find it in things that isn't necessarily there, and that's what we're here to do. And part of me thinks that's why UBI is so powerful, is that it allows people to find that meaning.
Yeah. The From what I've read about this, there's like an evolutionary reason behind all of this, is that when you're looking at, are these two things correlated? There's two kinds of errors you can make on recognizing correlation. A type 1 error is when two things are correlated and you don't recognize it. Type 2 area is when they're not correlated, but you think they're correlated. And apparently that a type 2 in life, usually a type 2 error is a lot less dangerous than a type 1 error. So we and also our dogs, if you observe dog behavior, are really much better programmed to recognize correlation, even if it's spurious, than we are to reject spurious correlation. So an example might be that say you avoid all snakes. You know that only some snakes are dangerous, and even though there are some snakes that would be perfectly good for you to have in your home because they'd be eating pests and they would never harm you. But the strategy that says, I kill any snake that gets anywhere near my home, that's not going to harm you too much by you're killing some innocent snakes there. But the one where, I only kill the bad snakes, but I screwed it up. I thought this was a good snake and it wasn't. And, it poisoned my baby or something. Right. That's a really bad error. So we're really programmed more to avoid type 1 errors when it comes to correlation than type 2 errors.
And I think what I'm feeling too is it's not just that type 2 errors are less dangerous, it's that they have other indirect potential positive benefits in terms of religion in general. To me is like it's a way for people to feel meaningful. I think that's a deep need for everyone, is to feel like I'm here for a reason. And however you do that, it allows you to go better through your life without feeling nihilistic, or like no one wants to feel like, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah. Although there are other things you can do to give your life meaning other than a belief in a supernatural power.
Absolutely. Yeah. And superstitions and everything are just one mechanism of that. But it sort of puts it into context for me as like it fits within this broader like general theory I have, that every single thing we do in some way or other is trying to make us feel in the search for meaning.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't want to go too far off into the religion stuff too, but it's just interesting that we're talking about this, because I did actually just share something today that I thought was particularly ridiculous, which is someone shared like a segment of a sermon, and part of their sermon was that they mentioned that they called basic income a godless concept straight out of hell. And I replied to that with some quotes from the Bible that I know that pro UBI people have shared, who also who are Christians, and reminded me too of one of my favorite papers along these lines. I think Carl's probably familiar with this too, because it was a BN paper from the Ninth Congress in Geneva. It was called "Calling a Christian Argument for Basic Income," and the summary of it goes as this. It says, "This paper outlines the preliminaries of a theological Protestant Christian argument for basic income at the level of a decent minimum. It argues that the idea of vocation or calling, developed by Luther and accepted by Calvin in the Protestant tradition, can and should be reformulated under the conditions of current modernity as a critical term aiming at clarifying what Christians understand as a good life. To decide whether an activity is rightly understood as part of a vocation, Luther sketches two main criteria. The activity has to imply a service to one's neighbor, and it has to be done in a spirit of love. A vocation in that sense and under modern conditions, however, can not simply be identified with paid labor. Evidently transcends the range of gainful employment in a capitalist environment, and thus can be understood to imply basic income that makes it possible to follow that calling." So, this idea that that if you have a basic income, then that is actually enabling of the pursuit of one's calling, where calling, is defined as something done in the spirit of love and service to one's neighbors. It just seems incredibly clear to me that UBI is definitely something that highly enables that in a way that is very difficult without it. So this argument that even like the FGA has been pushing, that it's anti-work and blah blah blah, that besides this evidence, even if it's like their own opinions against welfare are informed by this kind of Protestant work ethic kind of stuff, then the actual if you look at something like this argument when it comes to being a Protestant and what is like the goal of life essentially, then you can't just look at work as being just paid work. You can't just look at any kind of job as being somehow achieving like your life's purpose. Like it's achieving your life's purpose. You have to have some ability to pursue that and to refuse those who would want you to do essentially their purpose, which is often just making sure that they get richer and richer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this equation of that kind of work with employment, as making a wage, it's just so different and so condescending to the poor. When a lot of it, so many of the jobs that we offer to middle and lower class people are such as bullshit jobs, and they say, well, I get all this satisfaction from running my dad's corporation. You should be getting the same satisfaction from being a janitor at a meat packing plant, and if you don't, that's your problem. You're failing on your calling. That's a pretty big bastardization of what Martin Luther and John Calvin were talking about. But I'm really I was really disappointed by this one thing that's I grew up in a Christian church, so I know the Bible fairly well, and there's there's something in the Quran that is to the effect of never refuse a beggar because you are a beggar before God. And that then I was surprised to find out that this also, something to that effect, also exists in the Book of Mormon. But it does not appear in the Torah, the older New Testament. So it doesn't appear in so many words in Judaism and Christianity. There's lots of stuff that says help the poor. But as far as I've been able to find, there's not one that explicitly says help the poor unconditionally. But the Quran and the Book of Mormon both have this thing, help the poor unconditionally. And it just takes it to another level. I'm not saying these two religions live up to that, the people who practice them, but it's in their sacred text. And then, now I was surprised to find this in the Book of Mormon, because I've been told that most of the good stuff in the Book of Mormon is just lifted from the King James version of the Bible. And some of it is there's a lot of plagiarism in the Book of Mormon. But so I was asking people who know the Bible better than that, do you know this in the Bible somewhere? No way. So it's not in the Bible, but I listen to a lot of audiobooks. So I was listening to the Confessions of St. Augustine. And there it is. So no less a Christian figure than St. Augustine is the one who, before the Book of Mormon, had said, the Christian who said before the Book of Mormon said, never refuse a beggar because you are a beggar before God. So apparently Joseph Smith also read the Confessions of St. Augustine before he started writing his great work. Yeah. But it would be so much better. And there's so many things that you could imply from the Bible that say that. But if it said it explicitly, the way the Quran, the Book of Mormon, and the Confessions of St. Augustine do, that'd give us a lot of ammunition.
I think there's an interesting connection here to what we're trying to do with Comingle, where a lot of times we talk about how Comingle is set up to actually let people understand how it would work with a governmental model, like a taxation model. But it's not, some people don't like the idea of it, of thinking of like the 7% people would give in and to be divvied up as taxation can also just as easily be thought of as a tithe. We've thought of we could supercharge, the Mormon Church's tithing mechanism for them.
Oh, yeah.
It's just understanding that it is a way to unconditionally give to everyone in society without having to have the bandwidth to find every single, like when you say never refuse a beggar, that hurts a little inside, having lived in New York City, where it's like, I would like to never refuse a beggar. I remember walking by, 50 a day on my way to work at a restaurant or whatever, and thinking, I don't have the funds to never refuse one. And so then you end up refusing them all and just daydreaming about some sort of scale, taxable mechanism to do it well.
Well,
and that's what this is.
Okay, you're connecting with everything you say today. Connor, this doesn't usually happen when we're talking, but everything you say connects to some literature. That is what you're saying right there. That is why Rousseau argued that contemporary society is corrupting. It corrupts rich and poor alike. The poor become servile beggars or thieves, all of which are corrupt, and the rich become arrogant and insensitive and uncaring. So we have to learn to ignore the needy, because there are so many needy when we walk down the street every day. That is a corruption that if you lived in a medieval town, you'd face various kinds of injustice, but you would not face people who had absolutely nothing every day. And when somebody was needy, you would help them. And so that we are really corrupted by that. We are corrupted by that. But on to this issue about you're saying this is so strong. Islam also has something really interesting that Christianity doesn't have. Christianity, the number one thing Christianity says throughout the Old and New Testament is don't worship idols. And Christians should check that off their to-do list, like nobody worships idols today. You could say this is kind of like an idol, that's kind of like, but nobody really thinks that this statue is God. So they've won on that one. The number two stress thing is help the poor. But it doesn't make it into the 10 Commandments. Well, it is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It's called zakat, which is a responsibility to pay, I think it's 5% of your wealth or your income. Anyways, a certain amount you're supposed to pay. And there's the people I've talked to, I can't read Islam. I can't read the Quran because it's not the real Quran unless you read it in ancient Arabic. And okay, I'm not learning ancient Arabic. I've listened to a translation of it, so I have some idea. But anyway, zakat is this responsibility of the community to give so much of their income to create a world where the entire community is free from poverty. Now, some people say that means, you put that together with never refuse a beggar, and you got basic income. That zakat should be used to support basic income. But I've heard other people say that no, the zakat is really to support the mosques. So I really don't know. There was a woman that argued this is at a basic income conference in South Africa in 2006. This Muslim woman from South Africa with a headscarf and everything came up and said, "This is in Islam. No Islamic country is doing this. We need zakat now, and that means basic income." But a lot of other people I've talked to about it, well, it's not really that clear that that's what zakat is for. But it's you can't make that argument as explicitly based on Jewish or Christian principles as you can from Muslim principles.
Right. Yeah, it seems to be a stronger argument in Islam than others. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we should remind the audience that if you want to request to speak, this is the hour that we usually let people come and join in.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, and I have to be off at 1:45. So yeah, let's get people in while I'm still here.
While people are requesting to speak, you did remind me of a pretty funny. It's not quite the literature you read, but there's a Louis C.K. bit. I know he's persona non grata for a lot of people, but he's talking about someone came to visit him in New York City, and he picked him up in Port Authority, and they're from the Midwest or something, and it's this nice woman who walks by her first very, very alarmingly struggling homeless person on the street, just filthy and like very bad situation, and immediately kneels down and says, "Oh my God, what are you in trouble? Can I help you?" And Louis describes being like, "Oh no, and don't do that," and says, she says, "Why does he not need our help?" And he's like, "Well, no, absolutely. This is exactly what he needs. We just don't do that."
Yeah, that is the very corruption that Rousseau was talking about. Mm-hmm. We are all corrupt because of that.
And you feel it. If you're in a place like that doesn't allow you to have that care for the people around you, it makes you go inward. You feel like the I guess the dampening of your human spirit or whatever, just like your sense of self-worth, I guess, by not being able to interact. You train yourself to mind your own business and look at the ground and walk forward. You're basically alone in a sea of faces in New York City. It's such an odd feeling. And
if you did, you'd give away everything that you have, and still you'd be walking by people in desperate need every day.
Right.
You're Bankman-Fried, and you give everything away at the height of your ill-gotten gains.
I can't remember which UBI pilot this is from. I think it was either Namibia or India, but I do remember that one of the really neat impacts of it was that people actually were more likely to actually stop and talk to each other.
Yeah.
because that they were not doing that previously because they thought, well, they're just gonna ask me for money, and that knowing that everyone had a UBI meant that people were no longer like um, discouraged, from just speaking to other people. So not only is it, does it make more sense, in the way that we're talking about, but like,
Yeah.
there's this really strong positive impact of greater social cohesion of, what does society look like when they're actually more likely to just speak to each other and interact without this fear of, oh, they're gonna beg something, they're gonna want
Yeah.
something, whatever.
And there are, back to Rousseau and the corruption, there are plenty of societies known to history and anthropology that weren't corrupt in this way. That no one would be starving unless everyone was starving. That you would not ever in your life run by plenty of societies where you could live your entire life and never see anybody in the kind of desperate need that we see in our cities all the time. Now, that doesn't mean these societies were wonderful. They might have been corrupt in other words. Maybe they were really sexist. Maybe they were xenophobic. But in this one particular way, this immunity to the suffering of others, there are a lot of societies that were not corrupted in that way.
It's funny. I like to ask, or we would ask in our interviews with the bootstrapper participants. I like this idea of getting beyond the idea that UBI is money and like what does it actually buy? Because people get hung up on the money. This is going back to like the preconceptions of economists. What does it actually buy? And what we witness and what we saw very close at hand is it buys connection. It buys time with your loved ones. It buys the ability to, like, you're sitting in the hospital with somebody, to be fully present with them in that moment. Uh, it provides the ability to be nicer to your family when you're at home. It's all of it is what it really buys. Money is just a tool. That's not the end. It's a universal basic. Everything that money buys is what it is. It's not universal basic income. It's the income is the indirect thing, and what you get is what we're actually providing everyone, is the universal basic needs, which include the ability to have freedom and agency and connect with other human beings.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
income is the vehicle. Before you go on, Carl, it just we do have a couple people who have raised their hand to speak. So let's just
Put in the comment.
let's let Angie. Hi. Is there something you wanted to ask or Carl, or just add?
Yes. Well, I'd like to add something because I just put in the purple pill and I put it up there in the nest. You guys could remove it if it's not on topic. But my verified purchaser 5-star book review on the latest book that Walter Isaacson, renowned biographer, professor at Tulane, he's written several biographies on prominent men, prominent people. That he has one on a woman who, anyway, she's a gene DNA. Anyway, his latest is on Elon Musk, and I read all 600 pages. And then since I was a verified purchaser, they sent me, and I have reviewed books before. So they sent me an invitation to write a review on the book. And I did, and they looked it over and then they published it. Um, and I put it up there, both in the purple pill and up in the nest. Sometimes it's referred to as the nest or the up there, and you guys could remove it if it's not appropriate. But I've also listened to Isaacson speak quite a bit about his way of writing and what engages. And he said that basically he teaches his students that there's two prominent ways that writers approach a subject or a subject matter. And that is either they preach to them or they tell a story. And Does somebody have their mic on? Somebody's mic is live. I can
That's
hear.
that's
Yeah,
Carl.
let me mute myself.
No, it's okay,
Yes,
Carl.
please do, because it's kind of distracting when there's a live mic, and I'm trying to hold a thought, and speaking on these spaces is nerve wracking enough, and to be interrupted, it just throws the speaker off, and it kind of
Angie, did you want to just connect this to basic income?
yes. On the if you'll look at my review, the very first picture, you can submit pictures of the book. You'll see a yellow highlighted section. There's two. That's one, and the other one is when I speak of basic income, universal basic income to people. I have found that Walter Isaacson's words are indeed relevant. People would rather hear me tell a story about somebody in one of these programs, in one of these pilots, who shared their experience rather than the statistics or preaching. Well, this and this, this happened and this happened, and 15% were doing better and 40% did this. But if I actually say, look at this woman who blah, 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 or look at this person, and tell a real story about their experience of being given agency with their money, no strings attached. That's what it means. Universal basic income. It doesn't mean that you have to open a bank account. It doesn't mean that you have to go to treatment centers if you're having substance abuse. Those stories are the heart of universal basic income. And those stories, not the statistics, although that's how we get the stories, I understand that, are the reasons that people embrace it more than the concept. I hope I made myself clear, and I will mute. Not only will I mute, but I will go back to being a listener so you all can bring up more people to participate.
All right. Thank you, Angie. And it's actually a great point to make that we certainly feel strongly about ourselves. I mean, that's like the heart of the Bootstraps project, is to actually, show these real stories of these real people living with basic income, so that people can actually connect with those stories in a real way, versus, the statistics and stuff that just doesn't connect with people. Paul, thank you for joining us. And would you like to ask something of Karl before he needs to leave here soon, or just add something? Paul, are you there?
He's muted. Paul, do you know that you're muted? You have to click the microphone.
There, do you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yep.
we hear you now.
Okay, fabulous. I just tuned in a few minutes ago and was listening to the topic here. My comment, I don't know if it relates so much to basic income, but it's an observation that I make. I live in the Southwest here in Arizona, and when driving around, you always come across panhandlers, and it strikes me that the difference between a panhandler that I see in the States, I'll just say Arizona, versus a panhandler that I see in Mexico are night and day. In Mexico, I travel there. Panhandlers will come up to you and offer to wash your windows, are offering you like a service in order for an exchange of income.
You're saying this is
And
what you observe in Arizona or in Mexico?
in Mexico. Now, in Arizona, I observed the opposite, where the panhandler is out there needing, they usually have a cardboard sign with whatever their cause may be. A family member needs cost to help with the funeral or whatever, and it leaves people with the cynicism of, are they really saying the truth, or are they just really like scamming me? I personally will approach people and will actually go buy them a hamburger or something and bring it to them and give it to them, and sometimes they just give it back to me and they say, I don't want the food,
Yeah.
which leaves me to wonder, well, if they don't want the food, I mean, this is my gesture, because I know if I give them money, it's up to them to do whatever they want with their money. But I guess the cynical part of me says, well, they're just going to go out and buy alcohol or whatever. And I shouldn't be judgmental. I mean, the whole point is that they need the income. And I guess with basic universal income, it kind of applies to
Oh yeah.
that fact that people need the income, be it for a loaf of bread or a six pack of beer, whatever, But the main thing is it's the humanistic value, it's the human aspect of the person. So when I made a comment earlier about Mexico panhandling and here panhandling, why is it that there's a difference in the approach for the handout? That's
You know,
all.
yeah, first of all, yeah, it's very pertinent to talk about just people asking for help and the difference between giving them something that you decide that would be good for them versus cash that they could use on anything, which they can decide what's good for them, what's best for them. But also, I used to live in Arizona myself, and I've lived in many other states as well, and what I've observed is there's variety in each of these places that I've lived. So it's then the variety depends on even like the intersections that I happen to be at. So even in New Orleans, which is where I lived before DC, that I would be stop quite often at some intersection, and there would be those people who would come up and want to wash my windows, and I would say no, no, thank you. Um, so that does exist in a lot of other places, and then there's something else. There's something that happened in New Orleans in particular that I've never seen anywhere else. And Carl, maybe you've seen this too, since you also live in New Orleans. Is this it's really weird how you can be stopped at an intersection in New Orleans, and it'll be like the fire department will have like their boots out, or like the kids from school will have like these buckets, and they'll be collecting money for the fire department or collecting money for the school. And I look at that and it's like, well, how is that for like the a failure of taxation, and making sure that these things are funded. The fire department should be funded by taxes, schools should be funded by taxes at this local level, and yet they're out there competing with those other people who need money, just as individuals. And of course, if you have to choose between like someone who looks like they would spend the money on alcohol or whatever versus someone like a cute little girl, or like who's someone who's clearly a firefighter, then oh well, I'm going to give my money to them. So I just always looked at that as how weird that is, that there's like this competition between those who should even be publicly funded institutions and those who I regard should be, publicly funded in regards to, an actual basic income and functioning safety net.
Yeah.
Carl,
Can I chime in on this? I am guessing that the reason you're seeing a difference between beggars and in Arizona and Mexico has to do with something that is it's different than what you're talking about, is that in the United States, we probably have more laws against solicitation, and we have stronger laws against, stronger enforcement of those laws against solicitation. That begging was actually ruled constitutionally protected free speech, but solicitation, commerce is not. So the government can and does in a lot of places ban squeegee men. Squeegees appeared in major cities in the U.S. according to my recollection. I think it was the late '80s or the early '90s, and they were gone by the end of the decade because people banned them. Because squeegee men are not necessarily doing you a service that you want, and very often they would come up, they'd start squeegeeing your window whether you wanted it or not, and you felt like you were being assaulted. So they banned squeegee men, but they can't ban outright begging, which I think is a good thing. If that I think it is free speech in the way solicitation is not, and also people selling stuff is not always good. I remember being in Mexico with a relative of mine, and a little kid coming up to us, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old, coming up to us trying to sell us gum. And, we commented how sad that was. And my relative said, well, at least he's working. Like, this is a 7-year-old kid. Do you want your 7-year-old kid on the streets working? No, it is not good for 7-year-old kids to be working ever in any way, shape, or form. They should be frolicking and playing and growing their brains and learning things in school. The very idea that it is ever a good thing for a 7-year-old to be out there hustling to show people that he's done work to earn his bread is a bad thing. The world is not set up so that we earn stuff first and then we get it. We get things given to us for a minimum of 5 years, maybe more like a minimum of 15 years before we are meaningfully in a place to give back. The care first, give back second. That's how things work, and it's a good thing that things work that way.
Yeah, basically, Paul, I think you're pointing to the crux of the matter with UBI in general. I always talk about the big two issues that people have with UBI, and the first one, and I think the smaller one, is like understanding the economics and the mechanism. Like, do we have the money to do it? Which is usually the first barrier to entry because it's more intellectual and easier to write off. And then when you go through that and you answer the questions of how would it be set up, how would it function, it always boils down to, do people deserve it? And that's this push-pull of, trust versus cynicism that you're talking about. And the desire to control comes from that cynicism. And everything about UBI hinges on this idea that it is more impactful and more of the right thing to do and everything to lean into this idea of trust. But doing something like a UBI or giving $1 to a person on the street is always a leap of faith. It's once it's out of your hands, it's out of your hands. Whereas, if I've given someone a banana before and they didn't want it, and it kind of stings a little, but it's also, it's none of my business why he does or doesn't want a banana. This is the main issue that UBI deals with, is the broad acceptance of the idea that people can be trusted, and that's the main thing we need to convince in order to actually make it happen.
Well, I'm a proponent of UBI, and what I've heard back here in a few minutes makes total sense to me. It's just an observation I made, but no, I am behind the UBI. mindset. I think it's needed. And in a society as we have here in the United States, where people struggle and we're supposedly the richest country in the world, does really, get under my skin. And it should be better. Our citizens should be treated better. I agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Carl,
Thank you. Thank you.
Sign out now, or
I got a little bit more time, but not much.
okay, so let's get to Light Spirit. Maybe your name is Eric. Thanks for joining us. Do you have a question for Carl?
Yeah, my name is Eric, by the way. Before I give the question, I just want to follow up on your comments about. I'll give the question because I can't forget what my question is. How is it be funded? Is it going to be something like how Andrew Yang was suggesting, through like a value-added tax? Because I know the Republicans are really bashing that. Yet we have a value-added tax in Europe and then in Canada. I don't understand how it works exactly because I've been trying to figure that out by researching it. I can't find the specifics. Does your guest have an idea how it would be funded? Now,
you were actually talking to someone who has like really done some heavy stuff into this, even just recently, for a book that was just published that even includes this stuff. So yeah, Carl can chime in.
Well, I am not tied to one particular by one particular form of funding, because there's plenty of different ways to fund it. Now, with a nod to my functional finance colleagues, that really what you're trying to do when you fund something is to free up the resources to make them available to use it. And you're trying to counteract the inflationary pressure that basic income causes. It's not always a one-to-one correspondence with spending and what kinds of taxes or other strategies you need to make sure something's a viable policy. But one of the that can be that itself is a regressive tax, because high income people pay very little in VAT and low in percentage terms, and low income people spend almost everything they earn. So they end up paying a high VAT. However, a VAT is similar to a sales tax. I don't want to get into the differences. VAT could be a part. It could be a part of an overall progressive tax system, depending on what you combine it with. So I'm not opposed to a VAT simpliciter, but I am opposed to over-reliance on it. A system that had VAT only and no other tax would be highly regressive, even if it was tied to basic income. Income taxes can work, but some of the best taxes are to tax in two ways. One, tax people who own stuff rather than people who do stuff. And tax things that people are doing that you don't want them to do. So don't tax people who are automating the economy unless you want automation to stop. Do tax people who are polluting the economy. Tax people who are using land and other resources that would normally go to somebody else. Instead of basically giving away the broadcast spectrum to cell phone companies, television companies, internet service providers, and so on, we've basically given them away, the broadcast spectrum at nominal fees, auction off leases to the broadcast spectrum to the highest bidder, and that'll raise a lot of money. Other things we can do is stop giving away, get the donors out of politics.
Oh yeah.
So that the government can stop buying stuff that nobody wants, but the donors want to sell, like pennies. The government pays a company to make pennies for one reason and one reason only, because that company pays our Congress members in order to keep making the pennies. We do not need pennies. A penny buys less than a tenth of what it did than I was a child. And when I was a child, nobody said, "Oh, we need a tenth of a penny piece." We do this to satisfy donors. If we just got all the crap that the government is buying, all the favorable legislation that it has in favor of the donor class, and got rid of that, that'd go a long way to funding the UBI right now.
Oh, yeah.
So there's land taxes, banking. The banking system is run of it is the most democratic thing we have, the banking system, because the Federal Reserve is of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers. It's the only thing we have that really works that way. And of course, it should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. And if it did, we'd be making a lot of money off those bankers. Instead, the bankers are making money off us, and we're assuming all the risks. We bailed them out. We bailed them in 2000. So there's, when you've got, I just rattled off like a half a dozen things that on their own, most of these can fund basic income. Anyway, any of those can work. Some are better than others. So I don't get big into the financing issue, especially to do a poverty level basic income is only about 3% of GDP. To do something more like what I'd really want would be 10% of GDP. That's not that expensive.
Yeah, you're right, because we spend probably more on wars and all that other crap than spend on this. I wanted to give you guys a little background. I grew up with SSI, supplemental security income, because when I was younger, I had a disability and I got on it. And that really made my life easy and comfortable. But the drawback to that particular program is that it would penalize you if you tried to earn extra money. Therefore, it held me back. So UBI wouldn't have that limit. So I think it would be a way better, and just because then you can expand yourself and go to higher levels of finances.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that that the right-wing economists, who I've very often criticized otherwise, that they get right about basic income, is a lot of the existing programs we have that are supposed to separate the sheep from the goat, separate the people who don't want to work from the people who do want to work, to create a work. So for the truly needy who can't work, we're going to support them. And for those who aren't truly needy who could work, we're going to do nothing for them, except for maybe have a minimum wage and unemployment insurance. And so they'll get out in the market and work. And if you could perfectly separate them, and if there were two distinct categories, then that might work. But there are not two distinct categories, and even if there were, you couldn't tell them apart. So what we end up doing with these programs that are actually designed to give you a work incentive actually do the opposite. By once you get in the needy category, you're afraid to get out of it. Whereas you're on basic income, you go, hey, here's a job opportunity. I'll try this. Oh, this job sucks. I'll quit. No risk to trying to get a job. No risk to trying to start a business. And that ties into the entrepreneurship.
Well, I'll tell you, they had a rule that you cannot, your assets, including your bank account, cannot be more than $2,000. And I'd often save up $2,000 or more. I had as much as $10,000 saved up. But I had in my mind, I can't keep this because they're going to take me off. So I found a way to get rid of it without investing.
Right. It's a ceiling above poverty rather than a floor below it.
Yeah.
We saw that a lot too. And just the ability we saw people get better and better jobs because of the basic income, and people who are on disability not forced to like hide and pretend they can't work and things like that. It's just the freedom involved. The benefit of unconditionality is not just a large reduction in bureaucracy. It's also just so much more opportunity.
Yeah. And often that ceiling. Oh, go on.
It's something you have to be very careful when formulating this, that they don't let those conservative ones put like ceilings like that, thinking they're going to, force the people to be responsible, whatever. And it actually does the opposite. You've got to be very careful about that.
Yeah, the ceiling above poverty is often actually a ceiling within poverty. If you look at really what housing really costs and what these things are getting, the ceiling is really often leaves you really realistically in poverty. And then they make people work over and over again to prove over and over again that they really are eligible for these things. Yeah, the current system it's just punishing.
I wanted to say to Light Spirit Spiral. I can't see it.
Light Spirit.
Light Spirit. I also spent a lot of time thinking about the how to pay for it mechanism. Like I said, it's the big two, and the first one is how do you pay for it. And I wanted both proponents and opponents to really know better what they were talking about. And I spent about a year putting together a thing called the UBI calculator, which I linked in the comments and in the space. But it basically gave a bunch of different analyses of different types of proposals for how to pay for it, including Andrew Yang's policy specifically, which is heavily relies on the VAT tax and some deficit spending and things like that. But I put in a bunch of different things in there so that people could see just how much money in the American context anyway in like 2018 is available with different funding mechanisms and what level of regressivity or progressivity is in each one, how many people would come out under each one, and on all of that stuff, so that people could actually just play around with it and see. So it's ubicalculator.com, and it's not an exhaustive list, but basically it's where do you get the money to give money to people? There's a lot of options.
Okay, so unfortunately, I really have to go. I really have to go now. I wish I could stay for the very end, but thanks for having me on. It was a really good discussion. Went off in all kinds of unexpected but interesting ways. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Carl.
And I hope we can get, if we do this again, we can get the audience in sooner. All right, good talking to you. Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Carl.
Carl. Bye.
Yeah, take care.
All right, you can all turn your.
The one last thing before we was talking about I really wanted to say it earlier, and I kind of forgot this train, but it's about when you're helping those people. The Quran was saying help everyone you run across.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in that case, when there's too many, you just help one. You just, okay, I helped someone today. It may not be all 50. You get help. Still 49 need help. And the next day you come along and you see another one. I can give a little bit today too. So you give a little bit. At least you try to help every day when you can help, when you know you can help. Instead of just saying, oh, there's so many, I just ignore it and go on. That you don't want that attitude. That's a terrible attitude to get into.
Right, but it's also you know that there's a lot of people getting left out. It's sort of the GoFundMe model. So what we're trying to do with Comingle is like, and my partner Josh, if you go to the Comingle YouTube, has a nice video about relating Comingle to crowdfunding, and it's sort of like go fund everyone, and it's something that has to be done at a system-wide level. Like we all have to be part of a system that lifts everyone up, because no single person can be responsible for everybody. Right. So we all have to kind of do it together, or it doesn't work.
Another thing is we can gather groups together to brainstorm on how to help them stand on their own 2 feet. Like my dad gave the idea of creating like buy this vast amounts of land, like 2,000, 4,000 acres, and create like these little farmettes, like a couple acre farmettes, and then have like a community arranged setup where everybody that's homeless gets to use a farmette. It'd be theirs, but they're also responsible for growing certain foods in it that they donate to the community. So one will grow like tomatoes, one will grow like squash, one will do this. And those who have no knowledge on how the community town center will teach how to do these things. Something like that. Those ideas should be played with too, I think.
Yeah, what this reminds me of, like it's definitely true that if you as an individual, there's stuff as an individual you can do, but at the same time, there's this quote from Thomas Paine's Agrarian Justice comes to mind, and it's that there's little that any individual can do when the whole extent of the misery to be relieved is considered. He may satisfy his conscience, but not his heart. He may give all that he has, and all that will relieve but little. It is only by organizing civilization upon such principles as to act like a system of pulleys that the whole weight of misery could be removed. And I mean, this to me, he wasn't talking about basic income. He was talking about his plan, which is universal capital grants at 21, and also paying for essentially like the first disability income and senior pensions. But this take on this is that this requires a systemic solution. Basic income is a systemic solution, and also something like Comingle is the solution, where this is us creating a system together where each of us are saying we're going to put in as individuals 7% of our income, And as a result, the entire community universally will have, this basic income floor that no one will fall beneath. It's only possible through this systemic thinking instead of this, only trying to help like here and there, which is better than nothing. But it's just in order to really solve it, we're going to have
You're right. You're right. Yeah.
more systemic.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah. If I see you on again doing these things, I'll join in. It's very
Right.
good stuff.
Yeah, we
Right.
usually do
Okay.
these Wednesdays at noon Eastern.
Mm-hmm. So, and yeah, we're at 2:00, so we're right up at the end here. Before we end, there is just one other thing that I wanted to add about the Foundation for Government Accountability, which is the one passing all these anti-UBI bills across the country that we talked about earlier. And it's that I want to stress that this isn't something that every conservative, agrees with. It's not the case where Republicans are against basic income, and if you aren't a Republican, then you could be for it. It should be seen as a polarized thing. This is a quote from one of the articles where it says, Peter Germanis, a conservative welfare reform expert who worked for the Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush administration, calls the FGA's work dangerous. Quote, nobody who's serious about public policy really takes them seriously, Germanis told Public Integrity in a phone interview. But politicians seem to love them because the FGA tells them what they want to hear. And I really just wanted to stress that before we go, because, this is, when it comes to these lobbying networks and, that are very much funded by billionaires and, the rest of the 1%, like, this is the 1% really versus the 99% and not the left versus the right or anything like that. You can be you can be a conservative interested in welfare reform and understand that the real issue is like these high marginal tax rate, these traps that welfare creates through these asset tests. Like, you can be serious about this and recognize that if you want better policy, then that's the way to go about it. But instead, what we're seeing, what the FGA is doing, that this is, the rich and powerful moneyed interests who want to make sure that people are disempowered and don't have the ability to say no to jobs that offer insufficient wages, that they don't want people to have greater ability to, grassroots fund grassroots representatives who would actually represent the interests of the 99% instead of the 1%. Like, this is really what it's about, and it's not a left versus right thing. And with that said, again, I'll write up something to get this all down as far as
before you go, I've got a question: how to understand this calculator you mentioned, the UBI calculator, or
Sure.
the other guy. I'm assuming you when you put the calculator, you put your income, the money that you make right now, and then what am I looking at when I see that? Because I don't quite understand what I'm doing here.
Let me go to where you're at.
Well, we can cover this off. You can do this on Twitter via DM.
I'll just say make sure you added at least one adult to the household.
Right. Then I'm looking at how much I'll get paid if I got UBI, or how much I've been paying out in taxes.
It's both. You click on each one and kind of look through it, and it'll kind of line them up against each other.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Take care, guys.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, yeah, so we're at the end here. Thank you all for listening. We'll be here again next Wednesday, same time, 12 p.m. Eastern. And did you want to add anything, Conrad?
No, I just look at the thing in the comments about other ways to get engaged, and keep following along. We got a lot of stuff coming down the pike. We got a lot of momentum this year, and I'm really excited about what we're going to be able to let you know about. More and more is coming, hopefully by the end of 2024.
Great. And one other thing too, I guess, is just so everyone who's still here listening, we actually have the donation button up on itsafoundation.org now. So that's all active. anyone can donate and recommend it to others to donate. It's all set up now. So yeah, thank you all, and we will see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.